Hi, I'm Lucy from Sew Essential and I'm here today to show you how to sew shirring. So everything I talk about today is available on our lovely website, and I'll pop links to our website and all the products I mentioned below. Shirring is a way of gathering fabric with stretch. So here's an example on a ready-to-wear dress of mine where shirring has been sewn across the chest, and you can see it's sewn with an elastic thread so that it's gathered and it's parallel lines of stitches, but it gives it that stretch, which is great for fit. So it's often sewn across the bust or around the waist to cinch things in, and it's great for beginners because it's quite forgiving with the fit because the fabric will stretch to fit your body. So it's also really good if you've got a charity shop find perhaps, or an oversized clothing item that you'd love to just cinch it in at the waist. You could add shirring there. You could hack patterns to add shirring as well, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in the video and give you some tips around that. But there's also a lot of sewing patterns on our website that incorporate shirring as well. So if you want one that's already done the calculations and is incorporated into the pattern, there's lots of designs to choose from there. I've picked out a few of my favourites. So New Look 6692 is the most glorious maxi dress, absolutely beautiful. It's got a shirred panel across the back, which gives it that nice close fit around the bodice. There's McCall's 8200, which is a contemporary blouse, again with a shirred panel across the back that gives it that lovely fit. There's the Style Arc Asher dress, which is a super contemporary, chic, midi-length dress pattern. Very, very simple in the cut and the design. And then it's got a shirred panel around the waist to cinch it in, and then shirred cuffs for a little bit of decorative effect. And then finally, I'm making the Vicky Sew's Gloria dress pattern at the moment. That's what I'm going to demonstrate the technique on for you today. And that has got a deep shirred cuff, really contemporary looking design, and a really fun sort of decorative way to use shirring on that pattern. And all of those patterns are available on our website. I'll pop links to them all below for you, and probably throw another few in for good measure as well. So let's get started now. Let me show you my top tips so that you can have so much fun sewing shirring and get great results. Let's have a look at preparing the fabric, and it's worth mentioning that shirring works best on light to medium weight fabrics. Heavier weight fabrics, it won't gather as well, you won't get the same effect. So I'm using our John Caldor Prestige crepe, which is a lovely light to medium weight crepe. Beautiful for dresses, trousers, jackets, all sorts of things, blouses even. And yeah, that's the fabric I'm going to be using. Now, if you are adding shirring into a pattern or onto an item that you want to make more fitted, for example, bear in mind that most of the time shirring will reduce the width of the fabric by about half. So you can see here, if I show you the wrong side of this fabric that I've shirred, and this is just a scrap, this wasn't done, this was done very, very quickly. But you can see that that fabric has reduced to about half the width of the original piece. These two pieces of fabric were the same size before I shirred this one. So just bear that in mind if you are going to be adding shirring into a pattern, for example. Just test it out on a scrap of fabric like this, because different fabrics will behave differently. But if you know after doing a test like this, right, it is going to reduce it by about half, you'll know that you need to double the width of that fabric piece to compensate for the fact that it's going to reduce by half once the shirring is sewn. The other thing to mention is that you will need to hem your fabric before you sew the shirring. So this is the cuff piece for the Vicky Sew's pattern that I'm making, and I've sewn a lovely neat baby hem onto that, because obviously if I did the shirring first and then I needed to try and hem this edge of the fabric, you can imagine that could be quite difficult because of the gathers. And actually the shirring is going to come closer. I stopped there because that was enough as an example, but the shirring is going to come closer to that hem, and trying to get a nice even hem sewn on that fabric would be very difficult. So it's always wise to hem it first. And then it's ideally to get nice even lines of shearing, you want to mark your fabric. So I've done that here with the Vicky Sews pattern. I've used a Chaco pen, which gives me a lovely fine straight line. These are available on our website. I'll pop a link below. And I use my quilter's ruler, which I use for so many dressmaking tasks. Even though it's a quilter's ruler, I just find it so useful for so many dressmaking tasks. So I'll pop a link to that below as well. And I know that once I've sewn the shearing on top of this and it's gathered up, you won't see those markings, and also that it will wash out because it's Chaco pen, it's just tailor's chalk. But we do have a range of other marker pens and pencils as well that you can get, erasable ones, wash away ones. Here's just a couple more examples, but I'll pop links to all of those below. So I've marked onto there where I want to sew my shearing. I've also marked my seam allowances down the sides as well, because I've got these lines marked on and I'm not sewing in the round. What I plan to do is sew in a ladder motion. So I'm going to sew down each line and then come across at the end, so it will be in one continuous motion rather than having to start and stop. However, if you're sewing in the round, you will need to start and stop. And if you're sewing in the round and you're happy to keep starting and stopping at the end of every line of stitching, there is a way that you can use needle positions on your machine and your sewing machine foot, so that you don't have to mark the fabric. So I'm going to show you that method as well. I'll show you the ladder method that I'm going to use because I've marked this fabric, and then I'll also show you the method where you can use your sewing machine foot as a guide and your needle positions if you don't want to mark your fabric. To sew shearing, you need an elastic thread. It comes in a wide range of colours. All of these colours are available on our website, but generally if you're sewing with a darker fabric, use a darker elastic thread. If you're sewing with a lighter one, use a lighter elastic thread. You don't need to match the colour perfectly, but it's nice to have a range of colours, just in case you can match it perfectly, or so you can get something that ties in with what you're working with. I used a white thread for contrast on the sample that I showed you earlier, but on the real thing I'm going to use a black thread because I'm using that plummy purpley coloured fabric. So I'm just going to move these other threads out of the way. And then I'm going to show you that you need to hand wind the elastic thread onto the bobbin. So you use a standard sewing thread in the needle and you only use the elastic thread in the bobbin, and you have to hand wind the elastic thread onto the bobbin. If you try and wind it on your machine, it'll probably overstretch the elastic, it could snap, it's going to be too tight on the bobbin, so that's why you hand wind it. So I'm just going to take the end of the elastic thread, make sure I've got a nice clean end, and pass that through the little hole in the top of my bobbin. Just passing that through. And then I'm going to start and hand wind the thread onto the bobbin. And you don't want to stretch it as you wind it on, you want it to be taut. And you want the bobbin to be about 80 to 90% full when you start using it. So you just keep going until you've wound the bobbin and you're happy that it's as full as 80 to 90%. I'm just going to cut that tail off there now that I've got it going. And just keep going, keep winding it on. And I find that just letting the thread hang loose on a table or on your lap, perhaps it's just dropped on the floor, but we're okay with that, that's no problem. Just so that it's not stretching and it's just taut, as I said, as I'm winding it on. So there we go. I'm happy with that now. Probably could put a little bit more on that, but we'll call it a day there, and I'm just going to snip that thread. Now I'm going to insert the bobbin in the usual way, so I'm just placing it in the top there. I'm just going to snip that little tail off the end at the top there, make sure that doesn't go in the machine. But I'm just placing it in. Usually you want the thread to come down the side like that so it looks like a P, and I'm just going to place that in, and I'm going to hold the bobbin down and bring the thread through the usual grooves up and round, and then I'm just going to turn the hand wheel to bring the bobbin thread up before I put the case back on. So I'm just going to bring that bobbin thread up through the top of the machine there, and you want some nice long tails for you to start sewing with on the thread, on the bobbin and the needle thread, and then I can just pop my cover back on. You can see I've just got a standard thread on the machine going through the needle, and then I've just adjusted my stitch length to 3.5. Generally a longer stitch length is what people go for when shearing, so 3.5, 4 perhaps. But again, it's all down to personal choice. Test on scraps of fabric. I can't stress that enough. Test on the scraps of fabric. Results will vary depending on the fabric itself, your machine as well. And then if you're not happy with the results, the other thing you can adjust is the needle tension. But generally you shouldn't really need to mess with the tension. The stitch length should be okay as an adjustment, and just have a play around and see what works for you. Here I have my cuff with the shirring lines marked on it, and also the seam allowances down either end of it marked on it. So this is the example I'm going to do in a ladder effect, where I'm just going to keep going and continuously stitching, and then I'll show you a start-stop method and using needle positions as well. But let's just get started. I've got nice long thread tails at the end on both the elastic thread in the bobbin and the standard thread, and I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches in the usual way to get started and secure everything, and then off I go following the chalk lines. And I'm just using a standard presser foot. I'm using a 3.5mm stitch, and you can see the fabric's being gathered up behind me, and I'm just going to keep going, and it's super therapeutic. It's one of those lovely sewing tasks where you can just put your foot down and go. So I'm just going to enjoy that now, and I'll show you when I get to the other end how to pivot and move along to the next line of stitches. So I'm coming down to the end where I can see the seam allowance mark, so I'm just going to slow down, and then I'm using needle up down on my machine, which you can find on most modern computerised machines now. If you ever need any help with the sewing machine, do drop us an email. We stock them. We're happy to talk you through the options and the different features, but this is a feature that I absolutely love on my machine. It just allows me to stop with the needle down, which makes the pivoting really easy. So I'll just demonstrate that to you when I get to the end here. So I've reached the point where I want to pivot. I can press another button to lift the foot, so I can turn the fabric and then sew. And then again, I can do the same to pivot and sew back in the other direction. And as I sew the next line of stitching, I just want to stretch the fabric out as I sew that next line. And it won't look particularly gathered when you first start sewing, but as you increase those lines of stitches, then it will start to look more and more gathered. You can see as it's becoming more and more gathered, I might need to just stretch the fabric out a little bit to allow me to continue sewing. Generally, people say about 1/2 inch between the rows of shirring, so that's something to bear in mind. But if you're using a pattern like me, they'll usually mark that out for you, and 1/2 inch is what Vicky Sews has recommended as well. You can see it's starting to really take effect now. We're starting to get a really nice gathered effect there. And I'm just going to continue all the way to the end of the cuff. And my bobbin thread's just flashed up that it's running low, so I just sewed a couple of back stitches at the end of that last row of stitching, and I've just got one more to go here, which I'll show you the method you can use without marking the fabric. But you can see here we've got that lovely sheared effect, and as I say, if you play around with the stitch length, you can get different levels of shearing, go for a shorter or longer stitch length, just test them out on the fabric, see what you like. You can see on the back there, that's what the fabric looks like, and I'm going to give this some steam in a minute, which will cinch it in even more and exaggerate that effect further. But let me just refill the bobbin, and then I'll demonstrate to you the method that you can use needle positions and your sewing machine foot if you don't want to mark your fabric. So if you don't want to mark your fabric, there is a way that you can use needle positions. If you've got needle positions on your machine, if you move the needle as far left as it will go, and then line the previous line of stitches up with the right side of your foot, that will create rows of shirring that are about 1/2 inch apart, which, as I said earlier in the video, is generally what's recommended. So it's just a little bit shy of the line that I've drawn. That was probably just over 1/2 inch, but I'm happy to go with that just for the purposes of this demonstration anyway. But as I said, if you're going to do this method, you won't be able to do that ladder stitching when you continuously sew. You will need to stop and start at each end to do this method, because obviously you always need to be lining the right of the foot up with the previous line of stitches, whereas in the ladder method that I used, the fabric's swapping from side to side. So I'm just going to back stitch again at the start of this, because obviously I am starting a new line of stitching. Just sew a few back stitches, and then I'm just going to use the right of the presser foot and just line that up with that previous line of stitches, and that gives me about 1/2 inch between the 2 rows of stitching. And I think ultimately, you know, it is nice to have nice evenly spaced rows of stitching, but once it's all gathered up, you're hardly going to notice if there is a slight error or you are slightly out. You know, it's nice to try and be nice and neat, but don't be too hard on yourself, because it is a bit of a sort of crazy effect anyway once it's all gathered up. It doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. Well, it doesn't in my book anyway. That's my personal opinion. So yeah, try not to be too hard on yourself and just enjoy the lovely sewing process. And just keep stretching the fabric out as you sew so that you're able to sew parallel. And I'm just coming to the end, so I'm going to back stitch again at the end. And And there I have my lovely gathered shirred cuff with the pretty little baby hem on the end. I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. It looks so pretty. There's the back, just so that you can see that. And then, as I say, I'm going to use some steam now. I'm just going to hover some steam over it because that will gather it in even more. And then I'll test it to see what the fit's like. Obviously, because I have used that ladder stitch method and it is all one continuous line of stitching, if I did need to cut the cuff down at all and make it shorter, what I would need to do is just make sure I'd sewn some stay stitching or sewn the seam even across those shirring stitches to secure everything, because obviously if I cut that fabric now, that elastic's just going to pop out and all those lovely stitches will be gone, which would be awful. So just bear that in mind if you have used that method, or even the stop-start method. Actually, if you want to then reduce the width of the fabric and trim it down, you will need to just sew some stay stitches before you start cutting anything so that it's all secure. But yeah, what a thoroughly enjoyable technique. All of the threads, the fabric, everything I've used today, the patterns I mentioned, they're all available on our website, and you'll find links to everything below. So here's the lovely shirred cuff, all the sewing's done, and I'm just going to apply some steam now, which will just cinch it up even more and just exaggerate that shirring even further. You'll have to excuse my iron, it's been very noisy today. I'm using a steam generator iron. They're always a little bit noisy, but this one's been particularly noisy today, so just excuse that. So I'm just going to apply the steam to the fabric, just hover it over, and it'll just really help to exaggerate that shirred effect. I think we've steamed the camera lens up a little bit as well there, but you can see there that that's lovely and gathered now. So I just need to repeat on the other sleeve. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I just absolutely find this sewing technique so addictive. Don't forget everything I mentioned today in the video, the elastic threads, the fabrics, the patterns I used, they're all available on our website, and there's links to our website and all the products I mentioned in the description below. If you like what you see today, please like and subscribe, because every Friday I bring you a video packed full of sewing goodness, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.